when the filtrate is coming from the PCT to the descending limb, what is happening is the movement of water. When water is getting reabsorbed from the filtrate, the osmolarity of the filtrate is getting increased. Okay, when the blood was introduced into the cortical area, the osmolarity of the filtrate was 300 milliosmoles. When the same filtrate reaches to the medullary tip, the osmolarity comes out to be 1200 milliosmoles. This change in the interstitium osmolarity or gradient is brought about with a following mechanism. One of the mechanism is the movement of water molecules or water from the descending limb with the help of osmosis. Okay, and this osmosis is brought about with the help of the movement of solutes in the ascending limb. Descending limb is strictly permeable for the solute, only permeable for water. Okay, this type of reabsorption of water is known as, this type of water reabsorption taking place in the descending limb is known as obligatory type of reabsorption of water. Okay, this is with the help of osmotic gradient created in the medullary interstitium area. And how this medullary interstitium is created? With the help of the movement of specialized channels present in the ascending limb, which will help for the reabsorption of sodium, potassium and 2 chloride ion. Clear? Descending, इतना याद रहेगा कि it is highly permeable for water. Ascending limb, highly permeable for ions or solutes. Ascending limb में ट्रांसपोर्टर या कौन सा मैकेनिज्म वर्क कर रहा है? सोडियम पोटेशियम क्लोराइड आयन. Clear? When we are moving from downward direction, concentration of the filtrate is increased. As we are moving from medulla to cortical area, the concentration of the solute is decreasing. This particular section, okay, ascending limb finally reaches to the distal convoluted tubule. Okay, distal convoluted tubule again is divided into two segments, the early distal convoluted tubule and the late distal convoluted tubules. ठीक है, DCT को क्या कर दिया अपन ने? दो पार्ट में डिवाइड कर दिया, अर्ली और लेट, क्योंकि इनके अंदर की जो लाइनिंग है एपिथेलियल सेल्स की, ठीक है, दे आर डिफरेंट. द सेल्स which are lining the distal convoluted tubule of the early part, okay, they function differently, and the later part they function differently. Okay, so the first thing which comes into action that can be seen is, as the movement of solute sodium, chloride, potassium takes place, the concentration becomes, that is, of 200 milliosmoles when the filtrate reaches to the early distal convoluted tubule. Clear? It is all the role of the solute concentration or the osmolarity which is getting changed. Vertically, when we are seeing, there is transient change from 300 milliosmoles to 1200 milliosmoles. Again, from the medulla towards the cortex, the interstitium gradient changes from 1200 to 200 or 300 millismoles. This convoluted tubule is strictly impermeable for water reabsorption. Is it true or false? False? How? We cannot say this as a statement, because the distal convoluted tubule or the later part of the distal convoluted tubule is permeable for water molecule under the influence of different hormones. Without the influence of the hormones, the water reabsorption cannot take place in the distal convoluted tubules. So this cannot be said as a statement. They are water permeable, responsible for water reabsorption, but under the influence of different hormones. Okay, कौन कौन से hormones हैं? Aldosterone और ADH. What is the other name for ADH? केवल ये दो नहीं है, और भी बहुत सारे हॉर्मोन्स हैं जिसकी इन्फ्लुएंस में रीएब्जॉर्प्शन होगा. उन सब का मैकेनिज्म अलग अलग होता है, ठीक है. बट व्हेन द क्वेश्चन कम्स अबाउट दिस mechanism of urine formation, okay, you just have to write down certain things which is there in slide. If you want, you can just write it down or take note of it, that it has to be there in your answers. Okay, you have elongated theory books, but what has to be there in the answers is there in the slide. So be careful. Okay, so these are the different parts in which you can see there is tubular secretion of these ions, and still the filtrate is isoosmotic. And what is isoosmotic nature? The value of osmolarity is isoosmotic. Barazo, isoosmotic. Iso means same. When the osmolarity of the filtrate and the blood is same, that is 300 milliosmoles. Clear? जब ऑस्मोलरिटी फिल्ट्रेट और ब्लड की बात करें तो ब्लड की कितनी होती है? ये तो बच्चे वाइव के क्वेश्चन है जो टेस्ट पे होने चाहिए. ब्लड की कितनी होती है? जब वाइवा होता है ना तो उसी का होता है ना. नोबडी कैन हेल्प यू आउट. 300 मिली ऑस्मोल्स. तो जो भी फ्लूइड जिसकी अगर हम बात करें, यहाँ पे हम किसकी बात करें? फिल्ट्रेट की. फिल्ट्रेट की अगर ऑस्मोलरिटी वैल्यू 300 मिली ऑस्मोल्स है, so we will give it a term that is isoosmotic. If the concentration of the filtrate increases, okay, that is 1200 milliosmoles. So what will be the term given? Hyperosmotic. Okay. If the concentration of the solid decreases and it goes to 100 or 200, what will be the term? Hypoosmotic. So the distal convoluted tubule is responsible for hypoosmolarity. Okay, so that particular part becomes the diluting segment of the nephron. So you get a question, diluting segment of the nephron. So it is the distal convoluted tubule. और अगर उसके अंदर भी डिटेल में आए, ठीक है, अर्ली या लेट, तो अर्ली. वैसे तो आएगा केवल डिफरेंट पार्ट. So distal convoluted tubule is known as the diluting segment because of the hypoosmolarity of the filtrate, which is brought about with the reabsorption of the different solutes in the ascending limb. Okay, so the filtrate is going from the ascending to the CT. Okay, these are the things you have to draw. If you don't remember the basic things, you can give a graphical or pictorial presentation that these are the different parts of the nephron. They are responsible for particular substances which can be absorbed. Okay. In case of thick ascending loop of Henle, sodium, chloride, potassium, calcium, bicarbonate and magnesium, they are getting reabsorbed, and what is getting secreted is hydrogen ion, and the filtrate becomes hypoosmotic. Clear? Reabsorption of sodium, chloride, potassium, bicarbonate, calcium, magnesium. अब इसमें जो कैल्शियम, मैग्नीशियम, ठीक है, इनका जो reabsorption होता है वो पैरासेल्यूलर मोड ऑफ ट्रांसपोर्ट से होता है. हर सब्सटेंस का जो reabsorption है ना, जो क्लोराइड का है वो को ट्रांसपोर्ट मैकेनिज्म से होता है. इन चीजों का आपको टिप्स पे होना चाहिए कि ये रीएब्जॉर्प्शन तो हो रहा है, पर ये किस मेथड से हो रहा है. सेकेंडरी एक्टिव से हो रहा है, प्राइमरी एक्टिव से हो रहा है, डिफ्यूजन से हो रहा है, ऑस्मोसिस से हो रहा है, किस मैकेनिज्म से हो रहा है. तो हो रहा है सेल के अंदर सोडियम, पोटेशियम, क्लोराइड, ठीक है, इनकी कंसंट्रेशन, सोडियम मूव कर रहा है आउट, तो सेल के अंदर उसकी कंसंट्रेशन कम हो रही है. ठीक है। और इधर क्या होता है, पोटेशियम का सिक्रीशन होता है, और इनके कारण जो आयनिक ग्रेडियंट क्रिएट होता है ना, उसके कारण कैल्शियम मैग्नीशियम पैरासेल्युलर पाथवे से जो है वो रीएब्जॉर्ब होते हैं। असेंडिंग लिम्ब में कौन सा सबसे इंपॉर्टेंट है, एक तो सोडियम पोटेशियम 2 क्लोराइड ट्रांसपोर्टर, ओके, then it is the paracellular pathway through which calcium magnesium ions is getting reabsorbed, okay. Sodium potassium transport in thick ascending loop of Henle, okay, no need to talk. Now can you read it, loop diuretics? Can you read this loop diuretics? Yes, okay. These are the drugs which will be acting as diuretics. Okay. So urine becomes diluted. What will be the mechanism which will be acting for drugs is it will inhibit the reabsorption of sodium, chloride, potassium. Okay. Ascending limb में क्या हो रहा है, सबसे important इन सब का reabsorption. Sodium का reabsorption होता है followed by water. So if we inhibit that particular channel, ठीक है, हमने अगर क्लोराइड का सोडियम का रीएब्जॉर्प्शन इनहिबिट कर दिया, ठीक है, तो क्या होगा, वाटर का रीएब्जॉर्प्शन नहीं होगा, फिल्ट्रेट क्या रहेगा, हाइपो ऑस्मोटिक, यूरिन विल बी डाइल्यूटेड. सो दीज आर द ड्रग्स, ओके, दे आर नोन एज लूप डायूरेटिक्स. Okay, so you have to remember at least one example. Okay, what is the example of loop? What is the example which is acting on the distal convoluted tubule or the different part of the nephron? Okay, and the mechanism is it is inhibiting this reabsorption of sodium and chloride. Yeah. Thin and thick. So this is the descending, which is very permeable to water, obligatory water reabsorption. Okay, thick ascending, sodium, chloride, potassium, and not permeable to water. Very important. If you remember or if you write only these basic points, okay, the examiner comes or conclude that you have a basic concept, because the mechanism of all the primary, secondary active mechanism is same. Sodium, potassium, hydrogen, ATPase pump. Okay, that will be present on the basolateral surface, and the secondary active transport mechanism is taking place on the apical surface. Now this secondary active may be co-transport, may be anti-transport. Okay, or they may be getting influence under different hormones. So these hormones, when they enter into, they will change the mechanism. If they are acting through the second messenger activity, or they are directly acting, they are steroids, they will be directly acting, change the transcription and will be result into opening of different channels. तो सबसे important क्या है, primary active transport mechanism, secondary active transport mechanism, different channels जो कि individual ions के लिए opening के लिए responsible हैं, वो किसके influence में, they are under the influence of hormones, individual hormones. अब वो hormone steroid भी हो सकता है, non steroid भी हो सकता है, depending on the nature of the hormone, the mechanism works. Okay, the basic thing you have to remember is these points. Okay, this is the thighs acting on the early distal tubule. It is also inhibiting the reabsorption or the movement of sodium chloride. Okay, sodium potassium ATPase pump. Okay, chloride is moving with the help of its own channel because of the ionic gradient created. Doesn't need any hormone or under influence of any hormone, but it is moving with the help of change in the ionic gradient. ठीक है, composition अगर आपको याद है तो composition के हर part का आपको absorption और secretion automatically याद हो जाएगा, और वो याद हो गया तो उसके साथ के अंदर जो भी एप्लीकेशन है ड्रग्स की वो आपको ऑटोमेटिकली याद हो जाएगी कि वो किस मैकेनिज्म से वर्क कर रहा है, कौन से पर्टिकुलर सब्सटेंस का सिक्रीशन इंक्रीज कर रहा है या डिक्रीज कर रहा है. क्लियर? If you increase the reabsorption of sodium, what will happen to the potassium? So early distal tubule functionally similar to thick ascending limb, not permeable to water, called the diluting segment. Active reabsorption of sodium, chloride, potassium, magnesium contains macula densa. If you remember the structure of juxtaglomerular apparatus. Okay, early distal tube. Now 65% of the sodium has already been reabsorbed at the PCT. 15% of the water has been reabsorbed in the descending segment. Okay, whatever the load coming to the ascending segment, there also the sodium chloride remaining 5%. 25% तो क्या होता है ascending में reabsorb हो रहा है, 65% उसका बचा हुआ segment जो 10% of the filtrate load of sodium है, उसका 5% जो होता है वो early distal convoluted tubule में होता है. Okay, you have to remember these values. They may come in your MCQs. So 65% getting reabsorbed in the PCT, 25% getting reabsorbed in the ascending segment of the loop of Henle, the remaining 10%, the 5% of is getting reabsorbed in the early distal convoluted tubule. Okay, not permeable to water, not very permeable to urea. Urea is very important for the medullary interstitium gradient. तो इसका पार्ट आएगा तब अपन देखेंगे, but it is not very permeable to urea. Late distal tubule and connecting tubules. अब इसका late distal tubule जो होता है उसमें दो तरह के cells होते हैं. Okay, one is the principal cell, another is the intercalated cells. Again, the intercalated cells are of two types, type A and type B. Okay, so क्या फंक्शन होता है टाइप ए का? इधर से अच्छी आवाज आई थी. क्या फंक्शन होता है बता नहीं? एनीबडी एल्स? अमन? नहीं पढ़ाया ही नहीं? पढ़ाया तो मैंने बहुत कुछ नहीं है. चलो बैठो. ओके, जो सेल होता है, ठीक है, डिस्टल कन्वोल्यूटेड ट्यूब्यूल डिवाइडेड इनटू अर्ली एंड लेट. लेट के अंदर अपना प्रिंसिपल सेल होता है और इंटरकैलेटेड सेल होते हैं टाइप ए टाइप बी. प्रिंसिपल सेल जो होता है उसके ऊपर किस किस चीज के हार्मोन्स के एक्शन के कारण वहां पे फंक्शंस होते हैं. उसके अंदर एल्डोस्टेरॉन के कारण जो होगा वो फंक्शन होगा. एल्डोस्टेरॉन का सबसे स्ट्रॉन्ग स्टिमुलाई क्या है? एंजियोटेंसिन 2. उसके अलावा भी बहुत सारे स्ट्रॉन्ग स्टिमुलाई हैं, बट द पोटेंट स्टिमुलाई इज एंजियोटेंसिन 2. सो द प्रिंसिपल सेल, ओके, दैट विल गेट इन्फ्लुएंस्ड अंडर द एल्डोस्टेरॉन. ठीक है, एल्डोस्टेरॉन के कारण जब वो एंटर होगा, ठीक है, इट इज नॉट अ स्टेरॉइड हार्मोन, इट हैज टू एंटर थ्रू द रिसेप्टर. So a receptor is present on the basolateral surface. Aldosterone secreted, comes into circulation, reaches to the receptor, get attached to the receptor, okay, enters into the cell. There is change in the transcription resulting into the different change in the principal cell. So what are the different changes that are seen is the change in the movement of the ions, sodium and potassium. So these channels, they are present at the apical surface. Okay, till now you might be clear with the apical and basolateral. So these channels, they are present at the apical surface. Okay, so once this aldosterone enters into the cell, the channels will get open for the reabsorption of sodium and secretion of potassium. Aldosterone का क्या रोल होता है? Absorption of sodium and secretion of potassium. So this mechanism is also guarded or helped with another important proton pump which is present is the sodium potassium ATPase pump, which is present at the basolateral surface. But majority of the function of the sodium reabsorption under the influence of aldosterone, the most potent stimuli which is acting is the angiotensin 2. Other stimuli are also present, but the most potent is angiotensin 2. So what is the influencer? It will change, it will enter with the help of receptor. Once it enters into the, there will be the transcription, and this transcription results into the opening of channels. और ओपनिंग ऑफ चैनल्स कौन सी वाली सरफेस पे हो रही है? एपिक. जब ओपनिंग हो रही है तो क्या हो रहा है? सोडियम रिएब्सॉर्प्शन एंड पोटेशियम का सिक्रीशन. दिस इज द फंक्शन परफॉर्म बाय द प्रिंसिपल सेल्स and they are located late DCT. Clear? DCT को अपन ने ब्रॉडली किसमें दो पार्ट में डिवाइड किया? लेट. अर्ली का अलग फंक्शन, इसका अलग है. लेट के अंदर हमारे पास में टू टाइप के प्रिंसिपल सेल, मतलब मेन सेल्स हो गए. उसमें से एक हो गया प्रिंसिपल सेल, हो गया इंटरकैलेटेड सेल्स. इंटरकैलेटेड सेल्स अगेन डिवाइडेड इनटू टाइप A and type B. Principal cell works under the influence of aldosterone. Clear? इसका मैकेनिज्म समझ में आया? सोडियम का रिएब्सॉर्प्शन कैसे हो रहा है, पोटेशियम का सिक्रीशन कैसे हो रहा है, कौन सा चैनल खुलेगा और उसके कारण होगा. ठीक है. लेट डिस्टल एंड कॉर्टिकल कलेक्टिंग ट्यूब्यूल प्रिंसिपल सेल्स सिक्रीट पोटेशियम. ओके. This is the interstitial fluid. Sodium potassium ATPase pump, okay, needs energy for its movement. This is the secretion of potassium and reabsorption of sodium. Okay, sodium channel blockers, these are the drugs which are given in hypertensive patients, you can see, and what they are acting is, in this particular segment, they are inhibiting the reabsorption of sodium, because when sodium is getting reabsorbed, water is getting reabsorbed, increasing the blood volume. Okay, in hypertensive you have to increase, you have to maintain the pressure, so they are acting as inhibiting the reabsorption of sodium. अपने ascending segment में हमने जो ड्रग्स देखी थी वो क्या कर रहे थे? सोडियम क्लोराइड वाले चैनल को ब्लॉक कर रहे थे. यहाँ पे ये क्या कर रही है? केवल सोडियम को इनहिबिट. ठीक है. तो हर सेगमेंट की कम से कम एक ड्रग आपको पता होनी चाहिए व्हेन यू आर राइटिंग योर आंसर. और वैसे सब पता होनी चाहिए क्योंकि यू गेट अ प्रॉब्लम सॉल्विंग क्वेश्चन. सो आर sodium channels. When they are blocking the reabsorption of sodium, what will happen to the potassium? There will be decrease in the secretion of potassium. अगर सोडियम का रिएब्सॉर्प्शन नहीं हो रहा तो पोटेशियम का सिक्रीशन भी नहीं होगा. पोटेशियम का सिक्रीशन नहीं होगा तो पोटेशियम की कंसंट्रेशन क्या होगी? बढ़ेगी. ओके. सो व्हाट डू यू कॉल दिस टर्म इंक्रीज इन द कंसंट्रेशन ऑफ पोटेशियम आयन? hyperkalemia. You have to understand the terms, write it down. Okay. Aldosterone antagonist. Okay, these are the drugs which will inhibit the functioning of this principal cells. Aldosterone का function का antagonist क्या है? जो कि सोडियम के reabsorption को inhibit करे. Late distillate का type A and type B. Now, if you can see the difference between type A and type B, दोनों जो हैं वो बफर की तरह एक्ट कर रहे हैं. They are helping as potent buffers. Type A is responsible for the secretion of hydrogen, whereas type B is responsible for the secretion of bicarbonate ion. Difference क्या है type A, type B में? Type A is responsible for the secretion of hydrogen ions. Type B is responsible for the secretion of bicarbonate ion. Okay, so depending on whether the condition of the fluid, extracellular fluid, the blood is alkalosis or acidic, Okay, the functions may vary of the type A or type B. Okay, so type A is responsible for increase in the secretion of hydrogen. Okay, and B is responsible for the secretion of bicarbonate ion. So when alkalosis is there, it will release the bicarbonate. When acidic, it will secrete more of the hydrogen ion. Now what is बाइकार्बोनेट का कैसा है मैकेनिज्म? दिख रहा है इधर? दिख रहा है क्या मैकेनिज्म है? बताओ, इसका तो बहुत सिंपल मैकेनिज्म है बाइकार्बोनेट का तो. Okay, initially what we are seeing is renal interstitial fluid in which carbon dioxide, it enters into the cell, reacts with water, form the carbonic acid in presence of carbonic anhydrase, dissociate into hydrogen and bicarbonate ion. Okay, it is antipode with the chloride ion. Okay, so bicarbonate is secreted and chloride is taken inside. This is the function that better. This is the function of the type B cell. Can you read it from this distance or not? दिख रहा था? विजुअल एक्टिविटी टेस्ट है ये. कितनी दूर से आपको क्लियर दिख रहा है? लास्ट बेंच, कैन यू रीड द स्लाइड? खड़े हो, रीड इट. Okay, in case, sit down. In case of type A, can you see this? Okay, what happens here is in dissociation of the carbonic acid, but here the secretion of hydrogen ion with the help of ATP. There the expenditure is there, so the secretion of hydrogen ion by which mechanism is the primary active mechanism. Okay, type A and type B. Principal cells. So you may get a short note on this convoluted tubule because it is a vast topic. Okay, distal convoluted tubule. It is the early, the late distal convoluted tubule. In the early, we have the macula also. If you remember, in the late, we have the three type of cells: principal cell, type A, type B cells. Okay, principal cells working under the influence of aldosterone. Okay. So transport characteristic of medullary collecting duct is it will reabsorb sodium, chloride, ADH, urea, water in presence of ADH, bicarbonate and secretion of hydrogen ions. So what happens in the distal convoluted tubule in the later segment, again and again we are saying that it is getting under influence of the ADH or the vasopressin. So what happens is the vasopressin, they have the receptors present. Okay, so these receptors, they are named 1 and 2 receptors. Okay, so whenever there is need to remove excess of water from the body, or whenever there is need to conserve water, okay, so depending on the condition, the urine may become diluted, may become concentrated, but minimum amount has to be excreted per day. Okay, so under the influence of ADH, okay, so the signals, they are coming from the hypothalamus to the posterior pituitary, releasing the vasopressin. This vasopressin in the blood reaches to this particular segment where the receptors are present, and in this presence of receptor, the vasopressin, it opens the channels which will be responsible for reabsorption of water. Now these special channels which are present in this particular segment, they are known as aquaporins. Okay, these aquaporins, they are 10 or 11 in number, but only 2 or 3 types of aquaporin channels are present in this distal convoluted segment, which is responsible for the reabsorption of water. This type of reabsorption, which is working under the influence of certain hormones, okay, is as facultative type of water reabsorption. ओके, तो दो तरह के रीअब्जॉर्प्शन हो गए वाटर की, वन इज ऑब्लिगेटरी, अनदर इज फैकल्टेटिव. Okay, so where the obligatory type of reabsorption taking place in the PCT or the descending limb, where the facultative type of water reabsorption taking place in the later distal convoluted tubules under the influence of ADH due to the presence of aquaporins. तो दो चीजें जरूरी हैं इसमें वाटर रिएब्जॉर्प्शन के लिए, क्या क्या? Aquaporins and ADH. So in either of the condition, though the ADH secretion is normal, but there is some dysfunctional or aquaporins are absent, then too there will be no reabsorption of water. Aquaporins are normally present, but there may be some hyposecretion of ADH or absence of ADH, then also it will result into decreased reabsorption of water or nil reabsorption of the water. So both two things are important, ADH and aquaporins, and the type of reabsorption becomes the facultative type of reabsorption. So the question again sets in our mind is differentiate between facultative and obligatory type of water reabsorption. Clear? कौन कौन से टाइप का हो गया reabsorption? Okay, this is just an example of the load of sodium. Okay, how much is getting entered into the filtrate? Okay, filtrate कितना हो रहा है? 25,560 milli equivalent. Okay, it is getting reabsorbed. 65% getting reabsorbed in the PCT. Another 25% getting reabsorbed in the ascending segment. Okay, 5% in the early distal convoluted tubule. Okay, whatever remains gets reabsorbed in the collecting duct. So finally what it comes out is 0.6%, that is 150 milli equivalent per day. That is the sodium excretion. Okay, that is, if you remember the composition of urine, what will be the load of sodium present in the urine will be 140 milli equivalent per day. That is excreted. Okay, so each component composition you have to remember the values. Concentration of solids in different parts of the tubule depend on the relative reabsorption of the solids compared to water. Okay, if water is reabsorbed to a greater extent than the solid will become more concentrated in the tubule. If it is more concentrated in the tubule, it is hyperosmotic. Okay, if water is reabsorbed to a lesser extent, it becomes hypoosmotic. So osmotic, hypoosmotic and hyperosmotic. Okay, regulation of tubular reabsorption depends on what factors? It depends on the glomerulo-tubular balance. Okay, peritubular physical forces, hormones like aldosterone, angiotensin II, ADH, natriuretic hormones, parathyroid hormones. What is the role of parathyroid hormone? केवल कैल्शियम बोलोगे फिर कहोगे आपने पढ़ाया नहीं. क्या मैकेनिज्म है? एक लाइन में नहीं. कि पैराथायराइड का क्या रहता है, ये भी कहाँ पे एक्ट करता है? डिस्टल कॉन्वोल्यूटेड ट्यूब्यूल पे. ठीक है, डिस्टल कॉन्वोल्यूटेड ट्यूब्यूल पे कब एक्ट करता है? जब सीरम में कैल्शियम की कंसंट्रेशन कम हो जाती है. ठीक है, वहां पे कैल्शियम की कंसंट्रेशन कम हुई, सो देयर विल बी सिग्नल्स टू सेंड और रिलीज parathyroid hormone. Now this parathyroid hormone, what it will do? It will increase the reabsorption of calcium from the filtrate. Okay, क्या करेगा ये? Reabsorption. और reabsorption तब तक नहीं होता जब तक it finally reaches into the capillaries. Whether the cortical nephrons or juxtamedullary, depending on the type of nephron, maybe peritubular capillaries or the vasa recta. so the calcium gets reabsorbed under the influence of parathyroid hormones, and when this gets activated or stimulated, when there is decrease in the concentration of calcium, that is the serum concentration of the calcium decreases. Okay, though the serum concentration is less, but the calcium is more compared to the calcium present in the lining of the nephron. नेफ्रॉन के सेल के अंदर जितनी कैल्शियम है उससे तो ज्यादा ही ब्लड के अंदर है, ठीक है. सो इट मूव ओके अगेन कंसंट्रेशन के कारण मूव कर जाएगी फ्रॉम द सेल इनटू द ब्लड. बट स्टिमुलेटिंग फैक्टर क्या है इसका? डिक्रीज इन द कैल्शियम कंसंट्रेशन इन द ब्लड. ओके, yes. So these are the hormones which will affect the tubular reabsorption, sympathetic nervous system, atrial pressure and osmotic factors. Arterial pressure को explain कर सकते हो? GFR किसकी इन्फ्लुएंस में था सबसे ज्यादा? इन्फ्लुएंस में था ना, जबकि ऑटो रेगुलेटरी मैकेनिज्म 75 से 175 है तब तक तो वो रेगुलेट कर लेता है, ज्यादा कम हो गया तो वो उसको रेगुलेट नहीं करता. अगर आपका फिल्ट्रेट चेंज हो गया तो आपके फिल्ट्रेट लोड चेंज हो जाएगा. सो यू हैव टू कनेक्ट इट विद डिफरेंट पॉइंट्स. ओके, दिस इज नॉर्मल ग्राफ ट्यूबुलर लोड एंड ट्यूबुलर रीएब्जॉर्प्शन. एज द लोड इंक्रीजेस रीएब्जॉर्प्शन इंक्रीजेस, but there is a threshold value of certain substances which are carried with the help of carrier protein. Okay, peritubular capillary reabsorption, these are the certain forces which will help in the increased reabsorption. ये सारे वही स्टार्लिंग फोर्सेस जो कि हमने पहले देखे हुए हैं. क्या टाइम हो गया? 50? सही में? कोई बात नहीं, ये देख लो लास्ट. लेट डिस्टल कॉर्टिकल मेडुलरी कलेक्टिंग डक्ट प्रिंसिपल सेल. ओके, excess aldosterone, primary aldosteronism or known as Conn's syndrome, responsible for sodium retention. If there is excess of sodium retention, there will be hypokalemia, alkalosis and hypertension. चलो नेक्स्ट में खत्म करेंगे इसको.